Okay, it's 7 o'clock. Welcome. And thank you again my name is Jane Lamison, and I'm a Master Gardener with Napa County Master Gardeners. Thank you for joining us for our monthly library talks. We bring you these Master Gardener library talks the first Thursday of every month, and this is in partnership with the Napa County Library. And just before we get started at this point, I'd like to turn it over to our partner, Stefna Kramick, and she's going to talk a little bit about books you can find in the library. Thank you, Stefna.
Thank you, Jane, and welcome everyone. I have a couple of recommendations to make based on this program. I just want to say how lucky we are to live in an area that has a relatively long gardening season. And California Fruit and Vegetable Gardening by Claire Splan. It's an informative, well-organized book. It's a great guide to showing you how to start your own garden. The author, she emphasizes that you learn about your garden, your space. What hardiness zone do you live in? And this information, it will help you determine what plants will survive in your area. And learn about your plot. What kind of soil do you have? How can you best prepare it for the garden? What about water? Do you have it? Is it available to you? And if so, how will you irrigate? She provides a good basic primer for setting up your garden. There is a brief section on some of the pests and diseases that you may encounter, but the fun part comes when you move into the section where you start to consider what you will grow. There are about 50 vegetables, nuts, herbs, and fruits, including melons, listed. There are details on when to plant and general care and maintenance once planted. It's a fun book to flip through as you dream what you will include in your garden. A fun summer pastime of long ago was hanging out with my cousins and my brothers and enjoying fruits and from our family gardens. And eating watermelon on those hot summer nights was one of those memories I really enjoy. It was a treat, but even more fun for all of us cousins was spitting out those seeds. Who could spit them out the farthest? These days, saving the seeds of a favorite melon might be something the gardeners in the family are more apt to do. The Complete Guide to Saving Seeds by Robert Goff and Cheryl Moore Goff it covers 322 vegetables, herbs, flowers, fruits, and trees and shrubs. And this comprehensive guide to gathering, preparing, and planting seeds, it provides clear instructions that explains the process from beginning to the end. It's a great reference tool. It explains basic plant biology, proper seed storage, and steps to successful propagation. Both the California Fruit and Vegetable Gardening by Claire Splan and the Complete Guide to Saving Seeds by Robert Goff and Cheryl Moore Goff can be found at the Napa County Library. Please come in and check them out. Back to you, Jane.
Thank you, Stefna. Now, those books are in the chat, correct?
That's correct. Okay. I've written them in the chat.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We'll get going with our topic, growing summer sweet melons, in just a minute, but we have some housekeeping items to do. Again, a reminder to please turn off your video and also to mute yourself. Appreciate it. So of the couple of the housekeeping items, you'll see in front of you a copy of the slide about our mission. We're volunteers. We're trained and certified by the University of California. Basically, we are non-paid volunteer educators, and we're trained on the latest research-based information on home horticulture, integrated pest management, water conservation, and sustainable landscaping. Next slide, please. And we're getting ready to start taking names and applications for our upcoming 2025 Master Gardener class. So here's a little bit of information if you want to learn more. Please check our website. In June, we're going to have a brochure coming out as well, and there'll be information on dates regarding informational meetings. So you can take a picture of this and then tune in June. We sure hope you'll join us. Okay, we also, for any time we have a workshop or a video, a Zoom meeting like this, what we send afterwards is a survey, and this comes from the UC, and you normally receive it about a month after participating in one of our events. And the purpose of this survey is for us to kind of get an idea if we're hitting the mark. Are we making a difference in how you garden, any of your gardening habits, or any other habits like regarding water conservation, pest management, and so forth? So it's an important survey, and we'd appreciate it if you would take it. However, if you would like to remove your name from the list, please put your name in the chat box right now, and we will remove your name from the survey list. And I think that's it. And now I'm going to turn it over to Pat Hitchcock and Kathy Hartwig, and they're going to tell us about melons for summer sweetness. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Jane. I'm Pat Hitchcock. You're going to hear from Kat in a little while. We're going back and forth on this topic. And here's what we hope to cover today between the two of us. If there's a question you're worried that we're not going to cover, or if we forget to cover something that you need to know, again, the chat is your friend. Put your questions into the chat. When we're running a slideshow, we can't see the chat, so we can't interact immediately. But the hardy helpers in the background will keep an eye on the chat and let us know if we need to pause and answer a question. So here we're going to start with melons. Melons are in the botanical family that we call Cucurbitaceae. That's the scientific name of the family that includes melons and pumpkins and cucumbers and squash, and probably a lot of other things that we don't grow in our gardens. Most of the melons that we're talking about in this evening presentation are Cucumis mellows. Cucumis mellow types, and that is their species. So they're all closely related. There are many, many, many varieties. All you need to do is go to a seed catalog and turn the page to melons, and you'll see enough variation to make your head spin. The flesh of Cucumis mellow can either be sweet or bland. It can have a nice aroma or not. The rind can be smooth, like a honeydew. It can be ribbed, like the European cantaloupes. It can be wrinkled, such as casabas, which I don't have a picture of. And it can be netted, such as the muskmelons and what we all consider to be cantaloupes here in North America. We often call them all muskmelons in the United States, but technically the muskmelons are one of these varieties. And okay, I'm going to tell you a little about these plants because they're interesting. Like most of the cucurbits that I know, like squashes, they are called monoecious plants because when they flower, they have both the male flower and a female flower. It's not all in one. That's called something else. So each plant is producing male and female flowers. And the way you're going to get a fruit from a blossom is for somebody, usually an insect, and most frequently that insect is a bee, to be fluttering around the flowers and spreading pollen from the male flowers onto the female flowers. All of these types of melons, and you can see how, they all are different, and this is just scratching the surface of variety. All of them create new melons the same way. And because they're mostly pollinated by flying insects, they tend to they cross. So if you're trying to save these Cucumis mellow melons, it's worthwhile looking at that book by the Goffs because they have strategies for how you can prevent the bees from pollinating the various plants with each other's pollen. Because what happens when you mix a honeydew pollen with a Charente melon receptor flower, you don't know what that fruit, the seed of that fruit, is going to produce next year. The fruit will be fine. The fruit isn't affected by this cross-pollination, but it's the seeds inside the fruit that end up with a lot of mixed DNA, and they don't necessarily come true. But there are strategies in that book that Stefana recommended, is on my shelf as a reference. There are strategies for doing your own pollination if that's what you want to do. And not all of the Cucumis mellows are melons. In fact, there are probably people in this listening to this talk who have grown Armenian cucumbers before. But Armenian cucumbers, interestingly enough, are not cucumbers. They are a non-sweet melon. They're also Cucumis mellow, and they also will cross-pollinate. The flowers will cross-pollinate with your sweet melons. And there are some other varieties that we don't grow around here that primarily in Africa, they grow for seeds, edible seeds. Now, we have a lot of different choices in the Cucumis mellow family, but we also want to talk about watermelon. And you'll notice from the slide that watermelon is a different species, Citrullus lanatus. And it does not cross-pollinate with the Cucumis mellow. So if you want to save seeds of a watermelon, be sure you're starting with a non-hybrid watermelon, sometimes called an heirloom. And those seeds probably will come true if you are if you're growing watermelon and you want to save the seeds, you'll probably, and it's not hybrid, you will probably get the same watermelon next year when you grow those seeds. But if it's a hybrid watermelon, that means that its genetics is mixed up in order to create that hybrid, and you don't exactly know what you'll get when you save these seeds. Both watermelons and all of those cantaloupe types need a long, warm growing season. The good news is they're just as easy to grow, however, as pumpkins or squash or cucumbers. So how do you get ready for this? Kat is going to lead us through getting the ground ready and growing them.
Hi, I'm going to talk a little bit about preparing your garden prior to planting your melons. Lots of fun stuff, but there's a lot of things you have to do. First of all, getting to know your soil type or textures is a really important step to know. Your soil provides your plants with air, water, nutrients, a lot of things. And there are 3 different types of textures of soils. The texture is difficult to change, but it's not impossible. First, of course, there's a sandy soil. Its coarse texture has very good drainage, but it retains very little water or nutrients. Next we have is the loams, clay loam and sandy loam. They're of medium texture, they're easy to irrigate, and usually drain well. And they're really easy to work with. Clay soil is fine texture and usually more fertile and productive than other soils. However, clay soil compacts easily, and so it drains very slow. And of course, you can't work with clay soil when it's very wet. It develops in these hard clumps, and it crushes when it dries out. Also, when it's wet, it's really takes longer to warm up. Soil in Napa is typically clay soil. If your garden is really poor, it can be improved by adding organic matter such as compost, lawn clippings, manure, sawdust, leaves, things of that sort. I myself have used a whole lot of compost to improve my soil. I have a lot of clay and I've worked with it for a long time, and it's working out really good. Usually myself, I start around fall or winter by putting in some chicken manure and garden debris back into my garden along with leaves and grass clippings. Then off I go to the Napa Recycling Center and pick up a trailer load full of compost and I put that on top of the garden. I let this sit in the garden to mellow and break down, and also for an opportunity for the salts from the manure to leach out. When spring arrives, I mix everything into my soil and then top it with more compost. Oh, I love that stuff. There have been times I missed out on prepping the soil, though, in the fall and winter, but never fear, you could still save the day by topping your soil now with 2 to 4 inches of compost, and there's no need to work that into the soil. Next slide. Okay, compost is wonderful. It adds organic matter and microorganisms that works together to improve your soil. The larger particles of organic matter in compost create air pockets that hold moisture and decompose into nutrients. The organisms in the soil, such as insects, bacteria, and fungi, they further break down the organic matter into nutrients that are available in a form that the plants can use. Amending your soil with compost annually, or more often when you have compost readily available, I spread compost in a thick layer over my soil when the garden is not productive. Compost does not need to be scratched in or turned into the top layer of the soil. Turning the compost in only disturbs a network of microorganisms that are already living in the soil. So I've been using it for many, many, many years, and my soil is very rich in nutrients. But when the soil isn't so good, I'm having problems and stuff, or if you're having problems, I would suggest sending a soil sample to the lab to identify the deficiencies in your soil. You can look on the internet or Yellow Pages for a lab close by. And there's a lot of commercial organic garden fertilizers available in a wide variety of compounds and concentrations, but make sure you follow the manufacturer's guideline when applying these products. Also, if you see new leaves on your melon plants, the new leaves, and they're more yellow than the older ones, fertilize them with diluted fish emulsion or other liquid nitrogen fertilizers. Next slide. Oh. So now we've prepped the soil, added the compost, and your organic fertilizer if needed. Next is the task of irrigation. During the years of normal rainfall, the winter rains in most areas usually wet the soil to about 1 feet or more by spring. This year, I think it was a little bit more. If the soil is not wet to this depth of 1 foot, irrigate before seeding or transplanting so the soil is wet to the depth of a couple of feet. Next slide. Okay. Gardens in most areas of California require regular irrigation to provide the soil with moisture needed for maximum plant growth. Vegetable crops are not drought tolerant. So in order to produce good quality and decent yields of vegetables, the soil must be kept moist during the crop cycle. Melons are sensitive to drought throughout the season, but especially from transplanting to fruit set. To get fruit to the proper size, you water evenly, but not too much. Melons don't taste good if they had too much water. So check the soil moisture frequently and avoid creating a wide fluctuation in the soil moisture content. If you water overhead, you may get powdery mildew the leaves, or root rot, which is caused from too much water sitting at the base of the plant. The frequency will be determined by the depth of the crop roots, soil texture, and weather conditions. I use an automatic drip system that helps to maintain an even and consistent watering in my garden, and using a moisture meter to help determine the adequacy of my drip system. And there's a lot of irrigation systems out there to suit your needs. There's a lot of fancy ones, and there's a lot of the simpler ones. I like just putting on my automatic timer and just walk away, and it's good for days. But I do have to check it though, mind you. You know, you have to look for leaks, or maybe the battery's low on it or something, and you know, you can get a little bit of a problem there. So wetting the soil to just beyond the root system, that's what you're looking for. For mature melons and cantaloupes, which have a deep root system, my, this would be the top 2 to 4 feet of soil. If you keep only the surface of the soil moist, most of the water evaporates into the air. Adjusting the amount and frequency of irrigation according to the water use and root depth of each type of vegetable you grow, if possible. Melons require moderate and even watering from germination until fruit is full-sized, and low or none during the ripening of the fruit. Okay, why, you ask? Overwatering when melons are near maturity may reduce their sweetness and flavor. Also, pinch off the blossoms that develop at this point on, as they will not mature into ripe fruit before the fall frost. Okay, next slide. Okay, let me get a drink. Speaking of water. Okay, so adjusting the amount of frequency, excuse me. As a rule, it may be necessary to irrigate your melons up to 3 times a week in midsummer, and 1 to 2 times a week or less earlier or later in the season. And this frequency will be determined by the depth of the crop roots, soil texture, and weather conditions. Next up, we have Pat, who's going to talk about growing melons.
It bears repeating. Melons need a long, warm growing season to produce fruit. So here is a graphic that shows our average temperatures from January through December. We all know averages are just a guide, but they're helpful in figuring out, well, what do we mean by a long, warm growing season? You'll notice that well, June 1 is marked there on the graph. June 1, our average daytime temperature is 77 degrees, and our average nighttime temperature is 52 degrees Fahrenheit. 50 degrees at night is kind of my benchmark for planting all my warm season vegetables, but particularly the melons. You can probably expect to see those warm nights starting around the middle of May. Then if you follow the averages across, long about the middle of October, we start seeing the temperatures will fall off after that. Between the middle of May and the middle of October, we get, if everything was perfect, we'd get 168 days of warm growing season, with the warmest part of it being June, July, and August being the best months. It's not a coincidence that those are also the months with the most amount of sunlight. So let's look at maturity days for melons. Here's some seed packets I found. The Charente melon on the left, if you look at the top right corner of it in red, it says 90 days. You should get a melon in 90 days. we're going to talk about what that really means. The 3-flavor melons from Renee's garden is a fun packet because you can get 3 kinds of melons in one package. And their days to harvest are listed as approximately 85 days. And just not to leave out the watermelons, here's an organic heirloom watermelon, Moon and Stars. And if you look at the days to harvest that's on the back of this seed packet, it says 95 to 100 days. Wow, you think I can grow anything, because we just figured out I have 168 days of warm growing season, but not so fast. One thing you need to know about days to maturity is that they're always based on ideal conditions. And ideal conditions for melons is not at our latitude. It's farther south, where it's warmer and the days are longer. So that's one reason that we can anticipate maybe it'll take a little longer than the days it says on the packet for us to get ripe melons. The other thing that's interesting about days to maturity are that sometimes they mean from the time you plant the seed, and sometimes they mean from the time you put the little seedling, a pre-started seed, into the ground. I looked up a couple of national seed catalogs that you may have heard of, Johnny's and Territorial, and they both state in their catalog that when they give you the days to harvest, they're talking about when you put the plant into the ground. If you are going to start your melons in the soil, they say, add about 10 days to the days to maturity. Woohoo! So we're adding days, and we're going to add time to get the plants up to be seedlings. And then we have the problem of our climate being a little bit different from their ideal climate. So they're going to take longer than what it says on the seed packet. And to give you some actual data, in the Master Gardeners in Santa Clara did a watermelon trial back in 2006. And I've put a link in the resources if you want to look at this. They were growing out, I forget, nearly 20 different varieties of watermelons. And I believe they didn't grow any hybrids. I think these were all heirlooms of one type or another, with varying maturity days. So you see in the little graphic, the packet maturity days are on the left, and their actual maturity days, the actual days before they actually got the ripe watermelon from that particular kind of plant, were almost universally quite a bit longer. And Santa Clara's climate is perhaps a little cooler than ours, but this gives you an idea what we're talking about and what we're dealing with days to maturity. The other thing about days to maturity in our climate, and Kat's going to go into a little more detail about this, but towards the end of summer, we often have to deal with powdery mildew. And if your melons are not ripe and the plant starts being having symptoms of powdery mildew, they may not ripen. They may not ripen at all. Based on all of this, we recommend, especially if you haven't grown melons before, that you choose a melon with less than 90 days to maturity, and ideally 80 or 85, in order to maximize your chance that you're not going to run into some kind of problem because of the days to maturity. And speaking of maturity, how do you know that these suckers are ripe? So I have some pictures to share with you. Let's talk about what we call cantaloupe here in the United States, or muskmelon. These are the netted Cucumis mellows. The first slide on the left shows one that got away from me, and these are from my garden last summer. It got too ripe, as you can see, and so the inside got kind of watery and mushy. It was okay to eat. The texture wasn't great. But on the right is what I think was a perfectly ripe melon. And the way you know that these netted cantaloupes are ripe is most of the time, when they're ripe, they will separate easily from the vine. We call this process of coming off the vine easily slipping. Okay, so these netted cantaloupes tend to slip. There are also other indicators of ripeness. You can look for small cracks around where the stem is, the plant where the fruit is attached to the plant, and they usually change color. They get a little yellower, and sometimes they get fragrant. If you're out in your melon patch and you're smelling melons, you've got ripe melons. I'll just tell you that. You need to find which ones are ripe, because when they start being fragrant and you can actually smell them, you know they're getting there. So, okay, so these are netted. Another netted melon is this Gallia melon. The Gallias are a hybrid developed in Israel in the 70s. And they, like their netted cousins, will slip. That is, they will separate easily from the stem when they're ripe. But they also give you this color indication. The first melon on the left is fully mature. It's a mature melon. It's just not quite ripe. The one in the middle shows you the beautiful color. It's turned, and it's definitely ripe. And there you see a picture of what it looks like on the inside. This particular Gallia, most Gallias, I believe, are green flesh, like honeydews, which their honeydew is part of their genetic makeup. Honeydew is one of those melons that does not slip, does not separate from the stem when it's ripe. You have to cut it off. And these pictures, again, these are melons I grew last summer. The one on the right got away from me, that great big crack. I will tell you that melon was perfectly edible. I just cut away the part that was ugly from the crack, and it was a perfectly tasty melon. But the one on the left is a better indication of what you're looking for. Small cracks and the change in color. Again, honeydews go from being pretty white, more of a greenish white, to being more of a creamy color. And that's a good way to tell when they are ripe. But you will have to cut them. They will not, you could tug on them and they're not going to pull off the stem in the slightest. The European melons, this is a Charente melon. When I was in France, I discovered that they had many melons like this all over, and depended what area you were in, they had different names, but we think of them as European melons. They're what we call half slip. They will come off the vine with a little bit of a tug when they're ripe. They also get very fragrant. And the main thing to watch for with this kind of melon is for the ribs are still green. You can see the green ribs, like a pumpkin would have ribs, but in between that flesh is turning, is coloring, is going more yellow. And these will pull off if you give them a good tug when they're ready, but they're not as obvious as some of the other melons that truly slip. And not to leave out the watermelons, which are, of course, a different variety or a different species. And they definitely don't slip either. You have to cut the watermelon off. And they're a little trickier to figure out their ripeness. They do come in yellow and orange and some many hues in between. And typically, smaller watermelons are the ones that will have the shorter days to maturity. And I picked out some names and days to maturity out at random from a couple of seed catalogs. But when you determining their ripeness requires a little bit of experience. You look for a dry tendril near the stem. You look for I forget what they call the spot where the watermelon is sitting on the ground, but it will turn more yellow rather than white. Different melons are going to come in some slightly different colors, so you have to watch that. But again, a change in color. And then my favorite way to decide if a watermelon is ripe is to thump it. And I will tell you what one of the seed catalogs said about thumping watermelons. It's ripe when it makes a punk sound when thumped, not a pink sound or a pank sound. So it's something you learn. Either your parents teach you to thump them in the grocery store, or you learn in your vegetable garden how to tell when these watermelons are ripe. And by the way, you can grow seedless watermelons in vegetable gardens. The seeds are sold in seed catalogs. But an interesting thing about the seedless watermelons, they're hybrids of some sort. They're triploid is what they are. They have a very strange genetic thing. And they won't produce watermelons unless they have a pollinizing watermelon grown with them. So when they send you a seed packet for seedless watermelons, and don't ask me where those seeds came from if they were seedless, okay? That's one of the mysteries of horticulture. They'll send you a couple of some seeds of another kind of watermelon so that you can pollinate them. The problem, of course, then is watermelons as well as these other melons take up a lot of space in the garden. And if you want to grow the seedless ones, and you have to have additional space for the pollinizer watermelon to be available. So that's some ripe watermelon talk. Let's find out what the problems might be, and that's going to be cat.
Okay, now we get to the part of pest management. Oh my goodness. There was a time, I wanted to spray everything with a broad spectrum insecticide. I had mites all over the place and aphids, and I didn't know. I was new to everything. And at that one particular point in time, I sprayed everything. I got it. I sprayed everything. And you know what? Not knowing the ramifications of my actions, the results were devastating. There were no beneficial bugs to keep the bad one in check, and there are not many pollinators around. And clearly that was a really bad idea, really bad. So 15 years later, it took a long time for all those guys to come back. They just came back, slowly but surely. But my garden is full of life. There's bugs, bees, butterflies, birds, frogs, lizards, everything. Well, not everything. But anyhow, I created a biodiversity on my property in which everything is in check just by becoming organic in my response to managing my gardens. I actually do nothing most of the time. So when I see aphids and bugs, I know that my hungry little lizards will have a nice meal. Also, I let my chickens scratch around in the garden after everything has been harvested in the fall to feast on the overwintering bugs and larvae. But there are some culprits that will need your attention in your melon patch. Slide. Next. Oh,
There we go.
yeah. All right. So first we're going to take a look at some cucumber beetles. So as you could see above there, we have the spotted cucumber beetle. And then to the left, we have the western striped cucumber beetles. And these guys are really common in the vegetable gardens. The western spotted cucumber beetle, as you can see, is a greenish yellow and has 12 black spots on its back. And the western striped cucumber beetle there, he has yellowish orange and has 3 black stripes. And the cucumber beetle we're going to step back. The spotted cucumber beetle, it can be confused with the lady beetle or called the ladybug. And this is a really beneficial insect. And so to tell these two apart, it's the lady beetle antennae is short and stubby, while those of the cucumber beetles are long and thread-like, as you can see. And I didn't know there was the lady beetles can be green or yellowish green. So remember those spots and look at the antennae. You don't want to harm any of the beneficial insects there. The larvae of the spotted cucumber beetle feed on the roots of corn, small grains, beans, sweet peas, all kinds of things, but they do not cause noticeable damage. Okay. However, The striped one, cucumber beetle, the larvae feeds exclusively on melon roots. Aha, and can damage these crops when the infestation is heavy. These sneaky little beetles, they overwinter as adults in weedy areas, and then they move into planted fields as soon as the plants start to come up. They lay their yellow-orange eggs at the base of the plant or the small cracks, and the hatching larvae burrow into the ground, seeking out roots, and they feed there for 2 to 6 weeks. They pulpate and emerge as adult beetles, and they attack the above-ground portion of the plant. There are usually several generations a year, quite a bit of them. Management of the cucumber beetles is difficult. Most older plants can support substantial numbers without serious damage. So the best strategy is to place in the vegetable garden, place a protective dome cloth cover over the small emerging plants, and then remove it when the plants are old enough to tolerate the damage. And there's a lot of various predators that are known to attack these cucumber beetles. So next slide. Yeah, next we have the squash bug. Yuck. These adult squash bugs are about a ½ inch long. They're grayish or yellowish brown. They're winged. They have a flat back. They're somewhat speckled, but they often have a dense covering of black hairs. The edges of the abdomen are orange or orange and brown striped and have a black head. The nymphs, here you see, are pale green to almost white in color. The squash bugs feed on garden crops of summer and winter squash as well as pumpkin. Both adults and nymphs can be found near the crown of the plant, underneath leaves or under dirt clods, another protective cover. When disturbed, they kind of disperse real quickly. For overwintering, native squash bugs find shelter in the fall under dead leaves, rock, wood, and other garden debris. And once spring approaches, they fly from their protective habitat to the nearby melons where they feed, mate, and lay their eggs. The eggs hatch in about 5 to 10 days, and this second generation of squash bugs overwinters and produces eggs for the following spring. The leaves often develop small specks that turn yellow and then later brown. The plant may wilt and die. So what can we do about these guys? Well, you can remove all the debris from your garden once a crop is harvested by composting. I would throw it in the yard waste bin. I don't like to keep bugs on my property if I can avoid it. And you can also hand pick the adult bugs and nymphs, search for and destroy eggs in the spring and early summer. You can trap these bugs under boards near the plants at night and then destroy them in the morning. Garden insecticides are not very effective, especially on the larger the bugs there. There's insecticidal soap or neem oil may control the smallest nymphs. But you know what? If I've seen an infestation like this in my patch, I would get rid of it and stop the spread of the infestation. How I would do this is to bring over my yard waste bin and a shovel. I would pull up the plant and toss it in the bin. Next, I take the shovel and scoop out a shovelful of the soil that was around the base of the plant and toss that also. I want to get rid of it. And then spray the area with an insecticidal soap. Truthfully, I haven't seen an infestation like this in a long time. Maybe the time right before I sprayed that soap or that broad spectrum insecticide I'm not going to do that anymore. So the best method for controlling is prevention through sanitation, getting rid of all the infested plant, removing the old melon plants after harvest, keeping the garden free of rubbish and debris that can provide shelter for these guys. My garden, of course, I have my chickens and I let them out at harvest time and they take care of all these overwintering bugs. California, they did introduce a parasitic tachinid fly, which lays its egg on the squash bug. And it may be found in some gardens still, these little flies. You can look for the eggs of the parasite undersides of the squash bugs if you're so interested. Also, there's more toxic pesticides that are also registered for the use on squash bugs. However, these materials should be used with caution because of the negative impact on bees and beneficial insects, such as predators and parasites, that help keep these other pest insects and mites in check. In addition, they're not likely to give better control than hand picking combined with softer chemicals. I do want to refer you to the IPM site for more information on pest, or contact the help desk, which we have included in the resource slide for your convenience. But I think the name says it all, squash bug. Okay, next we're going to come to powdery mildew. Okay. All melons are susceptible to powdery mildew, but the disease is less common in watermelon than the other melons. It appears as pale yellow spots on the stems and the leaves. And these spots enlarge as white, fluffy mycelium that grows over the plant surfaces and produces the spores, which gives the lesions a powdery appearance. Spores are the primary means of dispersal, make up the bulk of the powdery growth. And these spores are carried by the wind to new host. All powdery mildew species can germinate and infect in the absence of water. Moderate temperatures, shady conditions are generally the most favorable for development of this. Spores are sensitive to extreme heat and direct sunlight. Affected leaves become dull, chlorotic, and may wilt in the afternoon heat. Eventually, they become brown and papery, and the plants may die. So what can we do? You control weeds and follow good sanitation practice. Avoid overhead sprinklers. There's a few varieties that are resistant to it, powdery mildew, and they're available. Applications of sulfur may be needed. Good coverage with sulfur on the undersides of the leaves are required. And be aware that some melons are sensitive to sulfur. What I do is, especially if there's a lot of leaves on your melon plants, what I do is, you notice they're sensitive to sunlight. I'll kind of pinch off a few leaves around there, mainly for several purposes. Maybe if you want to pinch off some leaves that are close to the crown of the plant, maybe to keep an eye for squash bugs, and pinch some, that around the melon a little bit. You don't want to take off all of it. I just pinch out just maybe about a few of them, 3 to 4 leaves or something, whatever, so that way I could take a look for squash bugs. And then I also take a look at the melons, and I want to know what's going on. Oftentimes it's a big mass of leaves and the plants are so huge, I kind of want to keep track of everything. So this concludes on our section of plant or pest management. Excuse me. All right. Take it
Oh,
away.
thanks, Kat. Okay, we have an opportunity for you. Free, who doesn't want free, right? This summer, the master gardeners are going to test out 3 different melons. They're pictured here. And we have extra seeds of the sugar cube and the honey orange honeydew seeds. And let's see, the sugar cube, let me just say, the sugar cube is a hybrid, and its days to maturity says 80 days. The honey orange is another hybrid, an orange fleshed honeydew, and it says the maturity days 74. So they're definitely within the window that we've been talking about today of not too long of a season of a melon. And what the master gardeners are going to, well, if you would like to be a community member in this trial, you're going to have to give us your name and your mailing address. And anyone who gives that information to us tonight in the chat, we will send the seeds to you by mail, hopefully in tomorrow's mail. And if it misses tomorrow's mail, it'll go out on Monday. What we're looking for when we do a trial, and for the melons, this is the things we're going to be keeping track of. We'll be keeping track of when did we plant them? Like, did we plant the seeds? When did we put the plants in the ground? How long it took for them to produce fruit? Whether we liked the fruit? How much fruit? You know, you can track melons by how many melons you get, or by how much poundage you got. And if you want to participate and are willing to put your name and address in the chat, we'll keep in touch with you by email after we send the seeds out to you, and hope that you have as much fun as I expect we're going to have by growing these. We have for you, oh, this is my story. This is Pat's story. I grew a lot of melons last summer. So the picture is a picture of the bed where all the melons grew. This was the hill method. There were 5 hills of 5 different melons in this bed. This bed is 15 feet long, and the actual bed is 3 feet wide. But as you can see, the plants spread into the walkways on either side of that bed. So you do need space for these melons. The melons that we're trialing, we think, by the description in the seed catalog, will be not quite as big as some other melons, but they're still going to need space. When you're choosing to grow melons, make sure you have enough space. Make sure they're going to get lots of sun, and that you have enough time for them to mature. And best of all, grow something that you think you're going to like. If you can't stand honeydew, don't bother with the honeydew. Grow something else that you really like. And I think we've created a list of resources, and if you're madly trying to write them down or taking pictures of this, I want to assure you that a recording of this talk will be placed on our website in a few days after we get it done today. And this resource page will be posted as a separate PDF on our website. So you don't have to watch the whole thing again to get to the resource page. But included here, our help desk and the reference to the watermelon trials, if you're interested in how those Santa Clara gardeners did. There's a lot of detail there. The IPM and some other on-site, UC on-site locations that have fabulous education or resources for growing all kinds of things, not just melons. And with that, we're ready for questions. Are there any?
Hi. Yes, we have a few questions. And mostly, and we also have someone's name ready for the seeds.
Great.
And the first question is, I've heard that the compost from the Napa County Resource Conservation, not conservation,
Napa
word?
Waste and Recycling.
Yeah, brings weeds in. Is this true? And then what also that same person asked, what can you tell me about using donkey manure? Do I need to let it sit before putting it on my soil and planting? And we did respond, but we could talk a little bit more about that.
Well, a few years ago, we had the chance to have, well, I went on a tour of the Napa composting recycling deal.
Mhm.
The process that they use for composting kills kills insects, insect eggs, it kills fungal diseases, and it pretty much deals with weed seeds. I've heard this before. I used compost from the city and now I have all these weeds, but I can't find any documentation of that. You know that weeds come from a lot of different places. So just because you put compost in your garden doesn't mean that it was the source of weeds. The other thing about the compost facility is that we have a state-of-the-art composting facility. They get the temperature, the compost temperature up into the like 160, 170 degrees Fahrenheit, which is why it kills pathogens and weed seeds. And the only and they regularly send it out for testing for not pathogens so much, but heavy metals and weird things that you don't want to have in your compost. So they are actually certified for organic use. I will say that the quality of the compost is specifically equal to what other people in our community are putting in the compost bins. So you are going to find bits and pieces of plastic and glass. You're going to find inanimate trash, small bits of stuff in that compost. Having said that, most of the master gardeners I know use a lot of that compost because if you have a big garden, it is the most cost-effective way to add compost into your garden. And then when you're talking about donkey manure or cow manure or horse manure, we highly recommend that you compost it first. And you can do that by, making a compost pile and letting it sit in a compost pile. Or if you want to use it in a vegetable garden, put it in, do what Kat was talking about. Put the manure out in where the plants are going to be growing in the winter and let it kind of winter over, let any weeds, you talk about weeds, animal manure has a lot of weed seeds in it because their digestion doesn't always kill the seeds that they eat in the process of grazing. So let it winter over to mellow out the nitrogens and the stuff that's in manure, and also to sprout any seeds. And then when you are ready several months later to plant in that, it will contribute greatly to the garden. But we never recommend putting fresh manure into your vegetable beds immediately before planting. We always recommend you compost it first. I hope that's what you guys told them in the chat.
Thank you, Pat. And there's also a question or a comment that I usually grow melons on a trellis to keep down the bug problem. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Great.
I'd like to know how like the melons that will slip or that will separate, they might fall off early unless you support them. I mean, because they separate so easily when they're ripe, they also are more likely to separate a little bit underripe if they're just hanging and you're not supporting them on a trellis. And of course, I don't know, a big watermelon or something, you'd have to figure out how to keep that watermelon from falling, from dragging the thing down. But yeah.
Actually, get used with pumpkins as well, pretty large ones. So
Yeah. As long as you just have to make sure that the plant is not going to, or the fruit is not going to pull off the plant too early or pull the whole thing down.
oh, she says I plant them into metal netting, which is zip tied to the trellis. Interesting.
Oh, okay.
Interesting.
Makes sense. Yeah.
There's always a way.
Yeah.
Any other questions for us this evening?
I felt like we talked a lot about compost, and remind people that Kat did mention this, but it kind of went by fast. The melons do need fertilizer. And compost often doesn't have enough nutrients in it. Compost is a wonderful conditioner for soil, And depending on the source of the material in the compost, it can have lots of nutrients. But in my garden, the one that I just shared with you, I always use an organic granular fertilizer when I'm getting ready to plant in the bed.
Okay. There's no other questions. Do you want to show, are you going
Oh,
to?
yeah. If you want to find this on our slideshow, you go to our website and you can type that URL in if you want to, but I always just Google Napa MG and it pops right up. And here is the page that you get. This is the home page right here. And off over here on the side, there's something called past programs and events. You can click on that button and it will take you to our archive. And there's something like 4 or 5 years of recorded programs and slideshows and resources there for you to explore. And that's where this will be posted. This program and the resource page will be posted there later this is already Thursday, next week, I'm sure.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. Please join us next month in June, and our topic will be growing lavender.